Representatives, Senator Mastroianni, and all the distinguished members of the legislature of Pennsylvania, we are very, very honored and very appreciative that you are giving us an opportunity to be heard, which we've been denied almost uniformly by the media and by legislatures elsewhere. All we ask is that you listen to the facts that we're presenting and then evaluate it.
My name is Olivia Jane Winters, and I'm a professional organizer and a business management consultant, and I live in Philadelphia. I actually was asked to be a minority inspector in 3615. That's the ward in the division. I was just purely doing this to help my mom out. She's a ward leader in a different area of the city. I'm actually I'm a registered Democrat, and I just wanted to help and make sure it was a fair election. I don't care who wins. I care that it's a fair election. I showed up to the polls at 6:30 in the morning. Immediately, I was met with a hostile attitude from all of the people that I had to work with. That would be the majority inspector, the poll watcher, the machine operator, and a committee man who was electioneering in the polls. He was wearing shirts and a hat and a mask for who to vote for. We are about like an hour and a half in the morning. We have a long line of people. We must have had, I don't know, 60 people in line in the building, snaking around the building. And a woman came up and said, "I'd like to turn in my mail-in ballot so that I can vote in the booth." And the girl who was clerking for me said, "Well, if you want to turn in your mail-in ballot, we're going to need to have you fill out this form, and the majority inspector is going to need to sign the form." The majority inspector had decided in the middle of the morning to go home and was not in the polling place for over 45 minutes. To my understanding, you as the I'm sorry, not the majority inspector, the judge of elections, my apologies. She had gone home. And to my understanding, the judge of elections is not to leave the polling place. So she was out of the building. We needed her to sign this form. The man who was electioneering and was a poll watcher, but also a committee man, confronted myself and the clerk and said, "You don't know what you're talking about. Anybody can sign the affidavit. Why don't you stop trying to cause problems? Why don't you shut up?" Started getting in my face, cursing at me, telling me that I needed to be quiet, that I didn't know what I was talking about, and I should just learn to sit down and not say anything and just let it happen. And my clerk and I said, "No, we're not going to let that happen. That's ridiculous. It says very clearly in our training and on this sheet that an affidavit needs to be signed by the judge of elections if somebody's going to turn in a mail-in ballot before they can go vote in the booth." We made her wait. Finally, the judge of elections came back. Not, of course, before he was threatening me. The majority inspector threatened to slap me in the face. And he told me that it was going to become a quote-unquote racial issue. I'm not really sure why that would become a racial issue. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with following procedure and making sure it's an honest election. I felt threatened. I called my ward leader. The ward leader then called the commissioner for Philadelphia, Al Schmidt. Al Schmidt had me call and report that to the DA. And then about an hour and a half after that, the majority inspector told me that she wanted to vote because we had a lull in people coming to the polls, so it was pretty quiet. And I looked her name up so that she could sign the book, and it said that she needed to remit her mail-in ballot or vote provisionally. She said, "Oh, I threw that in the trash." And I said, "Well, then you have to vote provisionally." And the machine operator and the same committee man / poll watcher who was electioneering that I mentioned before got up in my face again, told me that I didn't belong there, that I needed to shut up, started cursing expletives at me again, told me that they were going to allow her to do that and that I better be quiet about it. And then they let her go into the polls and vote. And she did not vote provisionally at all. She voted, and who knows, maybe she voted twice. Not to mention, it wasn't until I had actually called our ward leader, who had called the commissioner, who had called the DA, that they then sent representatives down to discuss this with me and defend me. I mean, I had maybe 6 men there because I was being threatened in the polling place. And the committee man that I mentioned earlier, who was threatening me, then got his cousin involved, who was working the polls as a poll watcher and was also wearing electioneering gear. She got up in my face, demanded to see my credentials, then tried to refuse to give them back to me, told me that they were illegitimate minority inspector certificates. They basically told me they were going to call my council rep and he was going to come down and make me leave. Just ridiculous threats. I then testified in a hearing for the city of Philadelphia for them on election day regarding this harassment. And meanwhile, I had mentioned that until we had the deputy sheriff come down and tell us how to actually receive a mail-in ballot and how to vote provisionally, we were not doing it correctly. The judge of elections was not doing it correctly. And I cannot stress this enough. My brother had the same role as me as a minority inspector in a different polling place. And he said they were not doing it correctly either. I don't think that anybody actually really knew how to receive a mail-in ballot. Most of the books that we had to get your authorized signature, some would have a remit ballot little box that you could click, and others didn't have that at all. So if somebody came in and remitted a ballot, I'd almost have to hand write that in just to keep it as honest as possible. There was no place for that. So I don't see really how they were keeping track of that, because you could easily do both. And I mean, it happened in front of me. My majority inspector definitely voted and then went into the polls and voted again.
My name is Gregory Stenstrom. I'm from Delaware County. I'm a father, a family man. I was a former commanding officer and executive officer in the Navy. I'm a veteran of foreign wars. I'm a CEO of my own private company. I'm a data scientist. I'm a forensic computer scientist. I'm an expert in security and fraud. Leah had recruited me for this election, and I was glad. Thank you for that. Thank you. So for the first part of the day, I was a poll watcher in the city of Chester, and I was with just another former U.S. Marine officer, and the two of us were the only GOP poll watchers in the city of Chester, which is about 40,000 people. Because of the consolidation for COVID, there were 7 polls that we were allowed to, that we were able to make it to in 22 precincts. What we saw out there was pretty orderly and exciting. People were excited to vote. One of the things we saw out in the field was that people, quite a few people had done mail-in ballots. So they came in and they hadn't been updated in the Delaware County database yet. So they would come in and say, the database is not showing me on the database, I'd like to vote. So the process, one of the processes was to give them a provisional ballot. And then they would vote provisionally, and then later on their vote would be sorted out. That didn't happen. I observed, and the gentleman that was with me observed 7 different polls where the people were given a regular ballot. So they cast a vote and put it in. We let it happen a few times. We didn't jump all over them. It happened a couple of times. We went up. In all cases, the election judges were very forthcoming, very polite. They apologized and they said they couldn't do it. But that somewhat spurred me to go down to the counting center, which Leah described. It's on the Seaport Ave. It's a remote building, not much around it. And I wanted to take a look. All day long I had been told that there were 10 to 20 GOP poll watchers down there and that everything was well in hand. And out of curiosity, I decided to go down. I arrived at 6 o'clock with 4 other gentlemen, again, former military and some good citizens from Delaware County, and we weren't allowed to get in until 11 o'clock at night, and we had to get some legal help to get us in. So it took us 5 hours to get upstairs. After that, what we saw here is, what I saw is, I really think the crux of this in Delaware County is, as an expert in this, I think it's impossible to verify the validity of about 100,000 to 120,000 votes. Now, Delaware County's got 425,000 registered voters. Approximately 300,000 of them voted. I don't know what the exact number ended up. Mayor Giuliani nailed that number. But of that number, over 100,000 are in question in my mind. What I saw as a forensics expert was an election process that was forensically destructive in the manner it was conducted, with the envelopes being separated from the ballots and gone to the other side of the room. And the problem with that from being forensically destructive is that when you go to do a recount, okay, the machines did a pretty good job of recounting, so if I have 120,000 ballots, mail-in ballots at one side of the room and envelopes at the other side of the room, it's still going to come out 102,000 votes for Vice President Biden and 18,000 votes for President Trump. I don't care how many times you recount those votes, the ballot's going to come out the same every time. So the notion of a recount in a forensically destructive process doesn't work very well. What I saw there was a chain of custody in all cases that was broken. It was broken for the mail-in ballots, the drop box ballots, the election day USB V-card flash drives. In all cases, the chain of custody and the procedures that were defined by the Delaware County Board of Elections and Election Process Review they didn't follow one. I couldn't even redline this multi-page document because the entire document would be, they didn't follow any of the procedures. So I personally observed USB V-cards being uploaded to the voting machines by the voting machine warehouse supervisor on multiple occasions. I saw this personally. I brought it to the attention of the deputy sheriff who was there stationed, who was a senior law enforcement officer, and I brought it to the attention of the clerk of elections. I brought it to their attention. I objected, and I said, this person is not being observed. He's not part of the process that I can see, and he's walking in with baggies, which we have pictures of, and it was submitted in our affidavits, and he was sticking these USBs into the machines. So I personally witnessed that happened 24 times, over 24 times. We have multiple other witnesses that saw it, including Democrat poll watchers. And we were told, I was told the next day by the solicitors, well, actually not the solicitor, but the attorney that we had secured, that they said every election they leave a couple of USBs in the voting machines and they're brought back, and generally the warehouse manager comes over and puts them in. So in talking to the U.S. Attorney General McSwain and other law enforcement officers, I found out that was not the case, that generally more than two is unusual. So they denied they did it, but as of today, 47 USB V-cards are missing, and they're nowhere to be found. So I was told personally that these 24 to 30 cards that were uploaded weren't there. Those cards, I demanded that they didn't update the vote live time. They only updated it about once every 2 or 3 hours. I demanded they updated the vote so I could see what the result was, and it was 50,000 votes. And I think as a computer scientist, an American, and a patriot, it doesn't matter who those 50,000 votes were. I'll tell you they were for Vice President Biden. But what was shocking to me as an American, as someone who has gone to sea, gone to war, that that could even happen. So several other things that came up was on Thursday, it took us 3 days for them to obey the court order that I secured with Leah's help and the help of the Thomas More Society, who we thank incredibly good patriots. They got us in there. They got the order for us to get in and watch it, look at the back offices, which were locked, for 5 minutes every 2 hours. I went in. I was the first one allowed to go in at 1:30 on Thursday, and then again at 3:30 for 5 minutes. The county solicitor had a stopwatch. On the first time, I was not allowed to touch anything. The second time, I did. What I observed in the locked room in the back office was 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots. They were in boxes of 500, stacked in neatly. The gentleman that came in with me was a Democrat poll watcher, is a forensic pathologist, a very detailed, very dedicated man, and he took meticulous notes as well. And I verified with him, are you seeing what I'm seeing? We both agreed as GOP poll watchers and a Democrat poll watcher that we had witnessed 60 to 70,000. We had a little bit of a disagreement there. The problem with that was by that time, the mail-in ballots had already been counted. So 120,000 mail-in ballots had already been counted, posted, and done. So my question is, where did the 70,000 ballots go? And nobody knows. We have a picture in here of a large number of boxes that I took that were filled with what appeared to be ballots sitting by the Blue Crest machine. They were there for about 3 hours, and then they disappeared. I thought it notable when I watched it, when they were taking the ballots up and down. I said, I am an expert in fraud. I saw the ballots going up multiple elevators and racks, and I think a lot of well-meaning people and a lot of honest people were there doing that. They were trying to participate in the process, and I would say that 99% of the people there, the way the process was designed, I believe that people thought it was a non-fraudulent process. I heard that said many times. I said, there's no fraud going on here. I said, well, I'm not, I didn't even bring that up. But I think people saw what they wanted to see, and they saw what was intended for them to see. I called it at one point kabuki theater. I said it was all designed for us to see it. It was entertaining. There were cameras on it. When we finally got into the back room where the votes were being ingested, as a data scientist, I want to see where the data is coming in. And I wanted to know the universe of the votes. Well, the universe of the votes was only supposed to be 120,000 mail-in ballots. We were told there were 6,000 ballots remaining. So I said, okay, we have a universe of 126,000 votes. And then when I get back there, the universe wasn't 126,000 votes. The universe was 200,000 votes. So that's a problem. I think the last thing a couple of other things is the Blue Crest sorter machine was only manned by one person. People ask me all the time, how do people commit crimes? I know there's a lot of theories here, and I always look for the simplest thing. People that sticking USB sticks in, putting ballots in. Very simple thing, only takes a couple of people. Doesn't take a big conspiracy. I think people look at things and they use inflammatory words, and like fraud and so forth. As a forensic computer scientist, my interest is in the data. Where did it go? Where did the spoilage go? How did the data come in and go out of the system? So I think as a scientist, we need to look at that. We need to audit that. What was really upsetting to me, and the most upsetting, was I had spoke to multiple law enforcement agencies and literally begged multiple law enforcement agencies. I said, go in. And I said, in order to prove that nothing's happening, you either exonerate yourselves in the process or refute what I'm saying, please. It's a very simple process. Just go get the forensic evidence from the computers. It's a simple process. You turn the computer off. It's non-destructive. Takes moments, maybe half an hour, 20 minutes to do it properly and collect the evidence. You open the computer up. You take a device called a bit blocker. You put it in the hard drive. It's done under the observation of law enforcement officers. They take a forensic image of the drive, put it all back together. It wouldn't have taken more than an hour to image all 5 machines. That was never done, despite my objections, and that was 3 weeks ago. Lastly, when they said, well, we've got all the forensic records and so forth. we just learned 2 days ago that virtually all chain of custody logs, records, yellow sheets, everything was gone. All forensic evidence, all custody sheets in Delaware County are gone. They had a signing party where they sat down, and poll workers were invited back to recreate those logs, and our understanding as of today was that they were unsuccessful in getting them all. So we have a situation where we have 100,000 ballots to 120,000 ballots, both mail-in and USB, that are in question. Now, there's no cure for this. There's no remedy for this. As a home charter, we could have a re-election in Delaware County for our own representatives within our own town, but there is no cure for that for the President of the United States. And I don't believe, as a citizen and an observer to this, that anybody could certify that vote in any good conscience. And if the Democrats that were a part of this process, had done things, followed their own procedures, which they created almost unilaterally, we would be in a situation where they could exonerate themselves and they could say, Mr. Stenstrom, you've been misinformed. We have evidence here that refutes what you say. But that's not the case. They can't do that. So I say, if you can't certify that vote, and you can't certify 100,000 votes out of 300,000, then you can't certify Delaware County. And I'm done, and thank you for your time and patience.
Colonel, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Senator, Colonel, and gentlemen, ladies. My name is Phil Waldron. I'm a retired Army Colonel, 30 years. Spent the first half of my career, just like Colonel Mastriano here, as a cavalry officer conducting armed reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance. Last half of my career spent in information warfare as a psychological operations officer and information operations officer, conducted computer network operations, electronic warfare, special electronic warfare, deception, counter-deception, and OPSEC, and a couple other specialties.
Sir,
sorry. You still got a Stetson and Spurs. So I spent all of my time as an operations officer. My perspective looking at this problem set is how to break in, how to break it, how to destroy it, how to manipulate it. And my team has been researching this specific issue since August, but we're working with another team that's been intently working on this problem set, the voting machine manipulation, for 2 years, since the Ted Cruz and Beto race in Texas in 2018 and the Kentucky governor's race, where there were significant anomalies observed. And I'd like to add that there are many, many more teams like ours, small teams that are joined in this fight, and they're throwing the flag left and right. So there's a lot of folks who are recognizing the anomalies. The voting systems in the U.S. And in Pennsylvania were built to be manipulated. They've been used in elections around the world and stolen elections around the world in Venezuela, Italy, Argentina, Singapore, Bolivia as close as 2 weeks ago. The Philadelphia uses ES&S, Pittsburgh uses Dominion, other counties in Pennsylvania use Dominion and other systems. So what's the real deal? So all of these election systems have a common DNA. SGO Smartmatic sold Sequoia voting systems to Dominion in 2010, and then the Diebold company spun off Premier Election Systems to Dominion as a result of an antitrust suit. So the bottom line is that these systems have similar code and similar functions. And just so you know, I know there have been statements to the contrary, but I personally debriefed the son of a Cuban intelligence officer who had firsthand knowledge of Hugo Chavez's family members who told him not to worry about the populist threat against Maduro's election in Venezuela, quote unquote, that it was guaranteed. Their father invested the money to build the SGO voting machine system. So I have no reason to doubt this gentleman. He's sworn an affidavit to this effect. But that's the root of the SGO voting machines. So these systems are not what you've been told. They are connected to the internet and servers outside of the U.S. They're connected from top to the bottom in the middle. There is no transparency, as our previous witnesses mentioned, as to how the voter information is processed, how and where it's stored. The voting record is able to be modified and or deleted by operators, administrators, and outside threats. Operators can assign votes for write-in ballots, blank ballots, or error ballots in large numbers so that they can be directed toward one candidate or another at the operator's or supervisor's discretion. And many experts have published how easily these machines can be hacked to manipulate votes. As a matter of fact, one of our white hat hackers previously discovered a malware that's present on the servers that captures every login and every password of every operator down to the precinct level that logs into one of these systems. That's just like giving the password to your bank account out, putting it on the dark web. It's not going to be there very long. And just so you probably are all aware, on 30 September, an election storage facility was robbed in your state. 30 USB devices were stolen and a laptop. Those USB devices more than likely had encryption devices, and you've just heard another previous witness talk about the non-standard use of the USB storage devices. So these systems, in a nutshell, allow authorized and unauthorized users to cancel votes, shift votes, preload votes, vote blank ballots, all in real time and in large numbers. They're connected from the top to the bottom. So one bad actor or a team of bad actors can have equally negative inputs. It's been described by another person in another state that we're working with, just like the lotto. Whoever organizes the lotto is always going to win. It's controlling the numbers and it's controlling the margins. Our experts and other academics believe that up to 1.2 million Pennsylvania votes could have been altered or fraudulent. This is what we discovered in the last 22 days. Really, only a detailed forensic analysis of the actual machines and software will truly show how many Pennsylvania citizens have had their civil rights violated. So to use these type of machines with little or no audit trails, little or no transparency of how the votes are processed, where they go, where they're stored, will never leave the public satisfied that we truly have a representative democracy. I'd like to correct something the mayor said. I am not a statistician. I'm a combat officer and didn't do well in math. But I can understand the numbers that he put out earlier. Want to share with you one chart. I believe it's in your package. So what our team has done is focused on the spike anomalies, and these are events where a numerical amount of votes are processed in a time period that's not feasible or mechanically possible under normal circumstances. I believe Greg Stenstrom mentioned earlier the processing of these ballots through machines. There's a manufacturer's specified rate of speed that a number of ballots can be imaged and processed. These spike anomalies in this chart really show where for us to look forensically to actually determine what happened with these votes. Our team has looked at these systems, and there are a dozen ways to interdict the voting process in these shoots, whether it's mail-in ballot manipulations. They can scan and allocate votes, blank votes, where there was a 70,000 votes left in the back room. There's just lots of ways to interdict these systems. So with that, I'll answer any potential questions.
Thank you. Next panel, please.
Could I just
Yes, sir.
ask him to clarify one or two things? When we look at this Pennsylvania fixing the vote chart that they all have, could you explain at the very beginning what that line means, Biden injection?
So at the very beginning of the chart, where there's a circle, it says on election day, What that indicates is there is a spike in loaded votes of 337,000 plus or minus of some votes that were added in there in one big batch. So that was an anomaly in the reporting. Normally you would expect to see a smooth curve going up, not any big spikes. That's kind of what Greg was talking about, the anomalies of loading and uploading those votes. So that big spike that occurs there is a prime indicator of fraudulent voting.
And that's 604,000 votes in 90 minutes, is that right?
Correct. This is 337 votes, 337,000 votes in that
In that period of time.
Yes.
And when you look at this entire curve with all these spikes, can you calculate how much of a vote that accounted for Biden and how much for Trump?
Close to 600,000. I think our figures were about 570 some odd thousand that all those spikes represent over time.
For Biden?
Correct.
And how much for Trump?
I think it was a little over 3,200.